Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us here for another episode. As always, wherever in the world you're listening to us from or whatever platform you're listening to us on, thank you guys so much for joining us here. I really appreciate all the support, all the messages, all the things that you've sent to me, all the things that you've sent to the show. Love hearing from you guys and love that I get to interact with so many of you and hear the things that you guys got going on in your coaching world, the questions that you have, the topics that you want to hear discussed. So keep those coming. And again, really appreciate all of those messages. We're going to jump into the topic of efficiency as it relates to offense today. We're going to talk specifically about the concept of developing more efficient offense. You know, as coaches, I'm sure we all want to get more points on the board. We want to do it in a more efficient manner and learn and be able to adapt and have our players learn and adapt and improve their offensive IQ and be able to handle all sorts of different defenses and still get good outcomes out of that. So that's what we're going to jump into today. We're going to talk about the concept of developing more efficient offense, talk with my guest about what he likes to do offensively and improving, player IQ, things that he keeps track of during the game. And again, as I mentioned, ways to get your players ready no matter what sort of defenses may be thrown at them. So we're going to be jumping right in here with my guest today, who is the head basketball coach now at his new stop here at Mayde Creek High School. Very happy to be joined by Coach Martin Wall today. Coach, again, congratulations as you jump in here in Mayde Creek. How are things going?
Thanks for having me. Things are going well. As I'm sure you can relate, and those listening, that when you start a new program, a new job, there's a million things thrown at you at the beginning. Sometimes you got to prioritize the most important things, and hopefully relationships and installation is at the forefront. So that's what I've tried to been focused on so far.
Awesome. Coach, let's jump right in with your basketball journey and your coaching journey. Talk about where this game of basketball has taken you and ultimately how you ended up at Mayde Creek.
Well, it's as a son of a coach, it's kind of taken me all over the world, literally. Grew up traveling around a lot from job to job that my dad would have, anywhere from Montana to Europe. Spent a lot of time, with my family because of that, which, developed really strong bonds there. Spent a lot of time with my dad's team, which gave me some early exposure to, coaching and learning and playing. And then as we, kind of moved around a lot, we finally settled in Texas and just kind of home now. But I spent my first 3 years as his assistant, actually, after I was done playing at Oklahoma City University. And then been an assistant for 11 total years and a head coach for 10, primarily in the Houston area, most recently now at Mayde Creek High School. So, basketball has just been a way of life from, time I can remember it.
So I have to ask about what did you kind of pick up, traveling and moving in a bunch of different places, except being a coach's son. What sort of things did you pick up even at a young age that sort of built your own, coaching profile or your coaching philosophy? What were some of the things that you kind of picked up right away and said, like I really identify with that, or, I really learned a lot from this experience that I had growing up?
Yeah, I think the thing that I learned the most, just because I was always the new guy, was I had a built-in community of my team, and those were the friends that I wouldn't need to be introduced or find them naturally at school. I would just know that these are the basketball players and they're going to be my friend group. Normally when you're in a team, you're in a program, you have a built-in set of people that are going to look out for you, that you can lean on. And so that's why I think I developed such a strong passion for the relationship part of coaching. And so I think being pulled around so many times as a young person, but having that bond through sports was I think at the time probably a curse, but it's probably a blessing in my coaching career.
Well, I mean, it's so cool to like have that like anchor, so to speak. Like no matter where it is that you went or wherever your travels took you, like basketball was that thing that could initially create those bonds, and it was something that you had like a lot of familiarity with, and it's kind of cool in a sense that like no matter like where it is that you go or wherever new place that you move to, you always kind of knew basketball was going to be there, and it was kind of something you could center yourself around.
Yeah, the data shows like kids that are part of a club or a sport are just so much more engaged, have so much more success.
Hmm.
And I think that's probably why, just because they have that support group, probably like-minded individuals that they're around that push each other forward. So that's the beauty of being on a team.
Another thing, based on your story, I wanted to kind of pick your brain on and ask about is you have a lot of experience as an assistant. So I wanted to kind of ask you about what for a head coach, what should they be looking for in their assistants? Can a head coach make sure that they're using their assistants in a viable and meaningful way and making sure that they're really valued and contributing significantly to the success of a program?
I think that probably is a little bit varied depending on the career point that head coach is in. So
Mm-hmm.
I know as a younger head coach, I probably needed a little seasoned assistant coaches, so that way I could lean on them for experience and handling situations that I was new to. As I get older and now I really want young or just you know guys that are going to come in and challenge the way that I do things, give fresh ideas that maybe I hadn't thought about. Come in with a viewpoint that I don't have, so that way we can kind of formulate the best way forward. So I think whatever your style is as a coach or whatever you're lacking as a coach, you should try to find as an assistant. So that way it just makes the program better.
I love that because I've talked about this with other guests, and I say it even to my assistants and those who work under me, is like I love to be like questioned. I love to be challenged. I
Mhm.
love to have people ask why I'm doing things the way I'm doing or present new ideas, because I think you're right. Like it's so easy to have a certain way that you feel is best in coaching, and that you can easily get stuck in your ways in this profession and not be challenged and not change anything. So to have somebody whose voice is amplified, and you're encouraging them to question or ask or to give new ideas, for me it's invaluable, because there's blind spots in my coaching, I know, and there's things that I might not think about, and to have somebody give me a different perspective on something, it's really invaluable.
Yeah, it is, and to empower those assistants to do that is an important part as a head coach, because if they don't feel comfortable coming to you with a disagreement or an idea contrary to maybe what we're doing, then you're not allowing that growth to happen.
And I think you also brought up a point too, right? When you have those younger assistants, those ones who have aspirations to be a head coach, they need to be given that empowerment. They need to be given that voice, and they need to be given, the opportunities to learn and grow. Because ultimately, we if that's what their goal is to be a head coach, we need to put them in those positions that they can be successful and go in that interview and get that job.
Agree with that 100%. I think head coaches, part of their job is to prepare and promote their staff, so that way they can grow beyond you. And I've been fortunate to have a bunch of really good assistants that have done that, and now I use them as a tool for my growth, because
Yeah,
they're experiencing all separate circumstance.
yeah. Coach, a big topic here right before we get into talking about offense. A big thing that is always talked about in coaching circles, and is something that a lot of guests and those of you listening I know are always curious about, is of course the concept of culture. And it has such a broad meaning, and it means so many different things to so many coaches. But I wanted to ask you about the culture that you're looking to develop at Made Creek. What are you hoping to build there, and what previous experiences do you kind of draw from that you establish culture in, that you think you're bringing over to Made Creek?
Yeah, culture is one of those things that's unique to every individual coach or program. Um, establishing it is hard when you're going somewhere new. I'm, in the very beginning, process of that right now, but maintaining it's probably even harder. Um, we all have goals and slogans and things written on the wall that we want our culture to be, but at the end of the day, it's really the collective purpose that the people involved in your program, have, and then most importantly, the accountability to it. And you know, coaches have systems for offense and defense, and blobs and slobs, but for all that stuff to actually benefit and lead to the development of your team and your program, you've got to also have a system for culture. And I think the thing that I've learned over the years is if you don't have that piece first and that's primary, then the other stuff is kind of a waste of time, because why you do things is more important than what you do. And um those are, for me, those traits that you have every day, that they really have to be grounded in the purpose that we have doing them.
So when you took this position, what were kind of your, first steps, kind of day one, week one kind of objectives of kind of setting the tone or establishing the culture the way that you wanted it?
I really tried to ask as many questions as possible. I wanted to know, so I met with the staff first. I told them I want to know, what the program needs, what the program
Hmm.
does well. I needed to find things that I need to focus on primarily first. And then when I met with the players, I asked each of them to text me, and I wanted them to just send me two things to say, tell me about you, and then tell me what I can do for you in the program. And I think that helps them kind of identify the things that are needed. Then I can kind of focus on those individuals, because if you don't have the individual in mind, and you're doing things as maybe for yourself or for what you think will lead to a win next season, then you're kind of missing the big picture, because the people that you deal with every day are the ones that will ultimately define your culture, and then those relationships you have with them have to be developed before you can just start writing stuff on the wall.
Yeah, there's a whole to the point of what you mentioned. There's this whole element of trust that needs to be established when you're coming into a new program, and I think those individual conversations you have and those individual relationships that you build are super important because players are not maybe necessarily like 100% trusting of somebody coming in right away. They want to know that this person is, cares about them, cares about the program, as is going to try and get their input on where things are at. And I think establishing that right away is really important because I've seen situations where, coaches come in and they blow everything up and, it's got the, my way or the highway and sort of approach and don't even, consider or think about anything about where the program was previous to them. And those situations, I think, get to a significantly rockier start than those, one-on-one conversations that you start to have, that other coaches may do right in the beginning.
Yeah, that mindset just kind of creates an opposition to, this is our program and we are going to grow it together.
Hmm.
Granted, it's under the guidance of the coaching staff, but like at the same time, if the players don't have um, a buy-in because they don't have a connection to it, then it's far less likely to be successful.
Yeah, 100% agreed. Coach, as we shift to talking about developing more efficient offense, let's start first by talking about kind of what is your offensive philosophy? What is it that you like to run on offense, and what are like those efficient outcomes that you're striving to get out of your offense?
Yeah, I think ultimately the goal of any offense is to create advantages for your players. To do that, though, there needs to be the space. There needs to be a clarity of vision. And when I say vision, I mean like the read based on what the defense did. Um, and then how to recognize when the defense is trying to take away your space or your vision. My preferred spacing on offense is 5 out with 3 on the side and 2 on the other. A lot of our actions would probably be a combination of read and react and a dribble drive, component. I hate though to call it dribble drive just because I don't want dribble to be the thing that they hear the most.
They'll hear that right
Um,
away, right?
yeah, but most the most important components of our style to be efficient would be the players committing to a couple rules that we have in terms of how to catch the ball and how to stop the dribble. Um, in an effort to speed up decision making, we kind of really try to drive home the technique to catch the ball. To do so, it kind of dictates what then you're going to do after you catch the ball. For instance, we have two types of catches. Static catch would be one that you're ready to shoot the ball, um, meaning that you've landed catching the ball, both feet on the ground, ready to shoot. Um, if you're not in an area to shoot the ball, maybe you're too far out or too closely guarded, or maybe you kind of weren't ready to shoot the ball, then we want you to quickly swing the pass, and that is continue the movement of the pass. Uh, Let the next guy determine what he's going to do with that ball, so that way it's not sticking. If you're in an advantage, maybe on a closeout or something, and you want to drive, then we teach the dynamic catch, and the rule is same. You got to be hopping the catch, landing on the receiving of the pass, and on a dynamic catch, you're split step looking to attack. The hand that you're dribbling with is the foot you have forward, so that way you're already generating that speed prior to uh, creating the attack with the dribble. And I think that those two rules for us creates a faster decision, and it kind of leads to some guys that maybe over dribble a little bit too much, or try to create without an advantage first.
The concept of the way that they catch the ball, is this, in your experience, something that players need to be, explicitly taught? Is it something that they have some maybe already background understanding that needs refinement? Just that process of the way that you talked about the different forms of catching the ball. What goes into the length of time you feel it takes for your guys to understand that concept?
Well, so once the players have been in the program for years, COVID did a lot of terrible things, but one thing it did allow is for all of us to just sit down and reflect, and develop some things that maybe you hadn't had time for. And what
Hmm.
I did during that time, one of the things I did was develop just a curriculum for teaching our program skills and concepts. And so, we have two feeders, junior highs that send their kids to us. We have 5 basketball teams on campus. So there's a lot of kids that have to learn all this stuff. And what I hope is happening is that they're being taught this vocabulary at a 7th grade level. They're being shown how to do that. They're especially when they get to the high school. This is something that is so important to our efficiency that they really don't have a choice but to do it out of habit, because we're doing it so often. We're doing it everything that we're practicing during practice in the athletic period. When they're doing shooting, they're having to land on two. They're having to get that shot off quicker. And ideally, what it does is just reduce the number of decisions they're going to have to make, because ultimately the game goes so fast that if they're having to think about what they're doing prior to doing it, they're going to be too slow in execution. So, yeah, so they get hammered on how to catch the ball. They get questioned on, how'd you catch that? Was your decision correct? Yes or no, and then move on. So we think it's a good way to avoid turnovers. Because if you're landing on both and you want to go left or right, maybe after a shot fake, you're gonna be in a position to travel less. If you're wanting to attack off the dribble, you're already moving, so you're gonna travel less. And then the main element is that it's gonna move the ball faster, which will put the defense in a little bit of a bind.
So you're now now that you're at Maid Creek, then this is something now that you are in the process of implementing now at with your younger levels, because now your whole feeder programs have changed. So this is something now that you're kind of starting with not only the guys that you have right now, but now you're also building that up with your feeder programs as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure like if there's a one of the players at May Creek, they're rolling their eyes right now because they're like great static catches, dynamic catches. I get it, like they're hearing it a lot. So and it's important to me, and I think it's really important to the offensive, identity that we're gonna have.
So I think that, naturally leads then to, the concept of for players to improve on their decision making. You talked about, how you love to say like the terms like dribble drive because obviously the connotation of over dribbling, I'm sure makes a lot of coaches pull their hair out. So when you're teaching decision making within your offense, what kind of goes into explaining to your guys or having your guys kind of figure out like, okay, this is a good time to, attack. This is, a good time to, keep the ball moving and keep the ball swinging. How do you kind of build that sort of IQ or decision making ability with your players?
So I think you have your I don't want to call them rules, but you have your guidelines for how to handle each situation, and it starts with what to do with the ball, and then and then it goes to what to do without the ball. So ideally, if you're practicing um, specific reads within our offense, you're putting them in a position to see that read as it would happen in a game. And I know that small sided games are popular, wildly popular as coaches. I just don't believe that guys practice the reads and the decisions from those reads from a defense that they will see without all five guys being on the floor. And so, to do that, we will practice that situation um, as it will be in the game. So it won't be a 3-on-3, it won't be a 4-on-4. Even if you do get that read more often, you don't get the actual read because maybe there's not a help side or maybe there's not a help to helper. So I really put them in a position to see it in a game. And the way to do that for us is we then add a constraint to the 5-on-5 to where maybe they're starting in an advantage that will create a read based on how the help decides to play that advantage. So now you're getting a position to where the ball is getting a genuine read about what happened, and now I can teach and coach and correct and in terms of the decision that was made based on the read, or maybe the spacing from one of the guys that didn't have the ball wasn't perfect to allow that vision. And I mentioned it earlier, that clarity of vision to see what that read was. For instance, if a guy has the ball in the left slot, maybe his advantage was created with a good, hard, purposeful cut from the right slot, and now the ball is going downhill to score. The only read that guy will have to have is that corner defender, if he's got the advantage based on that cut. So now the ball has a legitimate 5-on-5 in-game read to make a decision on. And if that corner offensive player doesn't lift just a little bit to the bend to make that pass, that pass obvious, then he also can't read to see what the defense is doing to that small movement. And so now we've created an environment to learn based on what they will actually see in the game. And I feel that that's the best way to prepare them for what they will see.
So to follow up with that, because I love the idea of constraints, right? Like you mentioned this, I love the idea of like putting those specific situations or limitations in there so that there's certain things that they're going to have to, be forced to adjust to or forced to make a decision off of. So I think, having those constraint-based practices are super helpful. With that, there's obviously a lot of decision making then that your guys are going to be making, when you put those constraints in, you put those 5-on-5 situations in. For you as a coach, how do you balance the concept of like kind of correcting your guys when you see them maybe make some mistakes or some errors with their decision making versus, kind of the process of letting them kind of make the mistakes and letting them sort of, figure it out and make adjustments on their own? How do you kind of balance that in a practice situation, their ability to kind of learn when those mistakes happen?
Yeah, so one of my favorite resources to go to learn from is a guy named Alan Keene, and I kind of blended the practice style that I prefer, which is there's always three teams, and like I mentioned, almost everything in our practice is 5-on-5, and
Hmm.
it's not roll the ball out and play, but it's very pointed skills or concepts that we're working on at this very moment. We're just doing it within the 5-on-5 structure. So I don't stop the play to say this is what should have happened, but the other component to how do we determine what we want to work on is actually being worked on. So we do start with constraints, and now we do change the scoring to emphasize what we want to have happen. So it doesn't matter if we're working on offense or defense. If the scoring is let's say we're working on ball screen coverage, right? Um, and if a team messes up the ball screen coverage, then we will just call a turnover because that's how we're scoring this, and that team is off. The majority of our coaching is now done after that team comes off. So we have coaches that lead a segment, and then we have 3 or 4 coaches that are now supporting those teams that are learning on the side. And that immediately after they mess up and their team is off, or maybe they got scored on, or maybe they turned the ball over, they're on the side discussing what just happened with a coach, but while practice is still going. So now we have learning that's happening on the floor, we have learning that's happening off the floor. And now quickly they're right back on the floor to do it again. And hopefully that adjustment that they just got from their coach on the side, or maybe, once practice is rolling, they'll do that on their own. A guy that understands it maybe a little bit better, or yeah, you're right, I read that wrong, and this is why, and now they're right back on the floor to do it again. And I think that's the way the game is played. You have to just keep going. You can't just stop and have coach talk to you every single time there's a mistake, because that's not the way the game is played.
Well, one of the cool things about that, as I was kind of imagining this in my head, is it really also trains your guys to handle almost like in-game situations where they don't have a lot of time, or like, timeout like situations where you only have like, 45 seconds or whatever case, a minute to talk to your guys, and then they got to go back out there. So in a way, by, having them come off and, have a quick conversation, you don't have, like you said, that time to have this real
Hmm.
long drawn out explanation. They need to go back out there and play. So it also kind of builds on their skills to be able to handle that in a game when maybe they only got, 30 seconds to have a quick conversation with a coach, and then boom, you're right back out there. It works on that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and it really makes their communication amongst themselves more efficient, because you don't have time for the pouting, the blaming, the complaining, because then you lose any opportunity to get better from that error that was just made. And so that kind of puts a microscope on what kind of communication are you having with each other.
Uh,
And there's no time to waste.
no, 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 absolutely not. You gotta make the adjustment. You don't have time to, sulk, and I tell my girls this too, right? We can't dwell on what happened on the last play and let, the next five or six go by still thinking about what happened on the previous one, right? Because we don't want one
Yeah.
mistake to lead to two, three, four, five.
Yep.
Um,
The ability to respond in that moment is one of the things that uh, we value the most, and it is also one of the things that helps develop them as a person when they leave us, to kind of handle adversity once they're gone. They just don't realize that they're practicing it every day.
They're practicing other skills behind basketball, whether you like it
Yeah.
or not. They're going to learn other stuff too, stuff that hopefully they're taking beyond basketball. No, no, for sure. You mentioned something that I thought was really important, and that was your players communicating with each other, or being able to identify or point out things that they see that worked or didn't work. And I know that with an offense that, like a 5 out or dribble drive. There's so much player decision making and player reads that are going on, and it's such a team offense that the players have to be working together. How do you kind of like empower your players or make sure that your players, are comfortable having those conversations with each other and being able to, kind of talk about like, hey, this is, what we see on the court, or, this is what we need to be doing. How can a coach kind of make sure that their players are, effectively communicating with each other and being able to make adjustments?
Yeah, we'll kind of go into this a little bit later, but one of the things that I hammer home is feedback, right? So
Hmm.
if a player makes a mistake and another player or coach is taking the time and taking the awkwardness that maybe players feel when having to give feedback to another player, because peer to peer sometimes is very difficult for these kids to do.
Hmm.
But if they're willing to do that, it's for them, not to them. And the only thing that would prevent that growth opportunity is their inability to accept that information. And so we discuss a lot about, are you here to get better, or are you here, to blame and to complain? And I think that the more opportunities they have to practice that skill, the better that they'll get at it. And it goes both ways, because I got to have a teammate that's willing to help me. And this is what I saw in that play that just was wrong. And this is my attempt to help you not make that same mistake again. And then that player that made the mistake has got to be willing and trustful to say, like, I accept that, and I am going to try to do that better next time. And that's really, at the end of the day, like, that's that's just what practice is. It's You're practicing not only that skill or concept, but you're also practicing that ability to communicate between each other.
Yeah, yeah, no, I love the way about the way that they like receive information, like, right? Like you have to, you know, be able to receive, criticism or receive, feedback or constructive comments, just as much as you need to, be willing to give it as well, right? I've had girls who are, very good at, maybe giving feedback, but a little bit different when it comes to receiving it. And I've also had girls who, can receive feedback, but also like they've struggled to build the ability to also communicate that with others. And, they'll, tell me something, but it's like, no, you gotta tell them what it is that you saw. So like you talked about, like every player is different and every relationship is different, but being able to empower your players to make sure that they can effectively receive it as well as also like give it, like that's it's going to be huge for like those players' offensive development mentally.
Yeah, and a large part of that communication is, if I'm giving you feedback, it needs to be based in solutions. It doesn't need to be pointing out that you made a mistake, because we already know, I already know you turned the ball over. What I need to do is try to help you with some solutions to avoid that next time. And if
Hmm.
my feedback to you is beneficial for you, that means I did it the right way. And that's a big part of it.
Definitely. We kind of touched on this, but I did want to kind of specifically ask about what you kind of go through to help your players in terms of their shot selection and their offensive IQ. You talked about some of the situations that you put them in where there's restraints and constraints so that they have to make, maybe different decisions and can't do the same thing repeatedly. So, um, are there other things that coaches can do or that you can do that can really help your players like get better with their shot selection and offensive decision making?
Yeah, I think the hardest part about being efficient on offense is making shots, right? And
Yep.
the biggest factor into making shots is taking shots that you can make. Getting from that realization, though, to the players understanding what a good shot is a big gap, right? And that gap is, I think, the definition of coaching, between understanding and actually doing the skill or concept. So what I did was I created a system that, I deal with high school kids, so they all know what a GPA is. What I did was create a system for evaluating shots using the same scale that they would in their classroom grades. So we have a shot GPA. A 4.0 is, a wide open kick three. A 4.0 is a wide open layup. Those are the shots, obviously, that probably don't happen often in a game, but they're definitely the goal of every offensive possession. And then it kind of goes down from there. So for instance, a 3.0 shot would be, um, a big advantage paint shot. Maybe I have you on my back, or maybe I penetrated and dumped down to a cutter who got a big, you know, advantage layup, a large advantage kick three, that kind of shot to where you're not in my vision. I've got rhythm. I've got balance. The pass was good. But maybe you're running out to contest. It's just not affecting me that much. That's like a 3.0 shot. And then it goes all the way down to, ones and zeros are, no advantage, shots in the paint, maybe a contested self-created three, all the way down to zero, which is help contested paint shots. Maybe a contested mid-range shot would be a zero. So now we track these things in practice. We track these shots in games. Every player has their own shot GPA. Every game has its collective shot GPA, and now we track it over the course of the season so we can identify to the players what shots we want to see out of offense. They understand what shots we're looking for on offense. And then we know who's most likely to take those good shots or create those good shots for others. And I think the really important part of this understanding is that it's clearly defined, and then they're held accountable to it.
When you started this process of the GPA, which I think is something that players are familiar with and they understand the terminology with, as you started to kind of track that and take a look at that, were there anything that surprised you out of that? Did you really notice as you started tracking it, wow, like, we're getting a lot more of, these type of shots than I thought, or I wasn't expecting after I started tracking this that, we were getting as many like 3.0 or 4.0. What did you kind of notice? What did the numbers kind of tell you, I suppose, as you started to really keep track of this?
Yeah, I should have brought this with me, but what I noticed the most, and I've probably said this to different people who have done it with their teams, and with our team, I was shocked by how accurate the good shots, that when you take more good shots go in. When you take bad shots don't go in. And there's exceptions to every rule. Some players, a 4.0 for that kid, is not a 4.0 for that kid. But what was shocking to me is how clear the difference was between threes and fours versus zeros and ones. And you're not going to win very many games when you have zeros, ones, and more twos, than threes and fours. And the shooting percentage was just drastic. And fours were, I'm guessing here, but fours were like you would make 67 or 70% of those.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas zeros, our team made 6 all year. Like that's all they made all year. And so the percentage was like, 1.2%. And so it's hard to argue with the math. Now, every team will have the value of shots unique to them. But for us, it was very clear, like these shots are the ones that will win us games. These shots are the ones that you yourself will make more. And so it was really easy for the kids to see and understand, even though they don't like it, right? In some
Yeah.
instances, because like every kid, if you walk into the gym with no direction, is going to start dribble, pull up, dribble, pull up, dribble, pull up, and I try to tell them, like, look, that's not a great shot. And they'll say, well, why? I can make it. I'm like, yeah, you can make that shot at the same percentage that you can make the three that is 2 feet behind you, but you're getting an extra point every time you make that one, right? And so it's really hard to argue with the math. And once we were really bought in, the kids would ask, like, all right, what's our GPA that quarter? What was my GPA that half? And so they were aware that, like, we got great shots, and the scoreboard usually reflect that.
I think that one of the really interesting parts of that is like when players can buy in and really understand that concept. Because I'm picturing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I can picture that, guys can even start using that language and talk about like, hey, this, that what you just did right there, that was, a 3.0 shot, or that right there was like a 2.0 shot, and guys can almost use that language, and they're using it for each other. And I think that that's really powerful. I think if guys like can communicate to each other, so instead of saying, a whole sentence or two or three trying to explain why that's a good or bad shot, they can just kind of use the vocab and the
Yeah.
language that's already defined, right?
Yeah. And, I mentioned earlier using constraints or scoring to kind of teach what we're trying to teach in any segment. And some of the times we would not score basketball points, we would score shot GPA points. And so a team would be playing with
Mm.
the intention of trying to get threes or fours, and you would be shocked at how often they would end up scoring just because of that mindset.
Yeah, yeah, because they know what that's supposed to look like. So they know, like, hey, that, like you said, that dribble pull up, that's not an effective shot. Let's see if we can, move it around and get, a good kick out three or something like that. They're actively thinking about trying to get those good looks, and that's awesome. And I wanted to ask too, because you brought this up, is are those conversations easy to have with a player who thinks that, hey, I think this is a 4.0 shot, but you're like, for you, it's not because you aren't there yet. For you, this is like a 3.0 or lower than that. For another person, this look might be different. Like, how do those conversations go when you try to explain to your guys that, like, for you, this shot is maybe this, but for another person, like it's this.
Right. Yeah. And I think it'll boil down to do you value our shots more than your shots, right? So if you've put in the work and you've developed the ability to hit the kick three, then I want you to feel empowered to shoot that. And if you haven't and you're not shooting that percentage that is good for our team, then you need to be okay with like saying, well, that's a great shot for him, but not me. And at the end of the day, like I said, do you care about our shots or yours? And
Hmm.
and it's really hard for a kid to admit that, yeah, I care about mine. So, that conversation ends pretty quickly if they answer that, the right way.
Are there other stats, coach, that you're keeping track of in a game? Are there other statistical outcomes that you're keeping track of in charting to kind of let you know whether or not you had an efficient outing or not?
Yeah, the two things that I think I value the most are that shot GPA and then plus minus. I know that it's not a foolproof stat, but it's one that I think is the most accurate in measuring the value that you add. And it's not necessarily one that we would track in a game, but it is definitely one that we track over the course of a season. And especially if you break it down per minute played, then it becomes a very clear indicator of, I don't, like there's some guys you don't know what exactly they bring to the table,
Mm,
but every game they're plus.
yeah,
And
yeah.
there's not a stat or a glaring um statistical category that they're just great at, but they are great at making the team better. And I think that's a tool, that coaches can use to feel comfortable about a guy going in a game. And, ultimately, like players always ask, how do I play more? How do I play more? You
Hmm.
play more by building trust in the coaching staff that we think you will go in there and make our team better. And plus minus when adjusted per minute played is one of the ones that I value and use.
It's really cool too, because I imagine with that you can like think to yourself like, well, in the stat sheet, like I don't see, X, Y, and Z, but obviously this player is doing something. And then you can like look at the film or look back on it, really kind of focus on like what are some of these intangibles or things that, this player is able to do and contribute to the team. It really it's a stat, this, like I said, this adjusted plus minus, but even then it's like, okay, well, this isn't on the box score. So let's see what's, beyond what shows on the box score and really see what this player is contributing. You can really get a sense of like I said, all those other intangible elements that players are bringing.
Yeah, and it's also really enlightening when you start looking at which lineup has
Mm.
the best plus minus, right? So uh, player A may have a great plus minus when he's with player D, but he doesn't have it when he's with player B. And so then you start trying to come up with reasons as to what's causing that. If you have a large enough sample size, you're gonna eliminate maybe just someone had a real bad game or a real good game. But like that's also a way to help you with, I need a lineup on the floor that I think can help us right now, and I know that this lineup has proven to be that over the course of 10 or 20 games. So it's helpful there too.
Yeah, you saying that reminded me of a group that I even had this past year, and this is on the defensive side where, I had a group who just for whatever reason they really played well off each other defensively. They just had some sort of I don't know telepathic communication or ability to talk to each other where just offensively it was a little bit more limited, but if I needed them to get stops or I needed to, get a little disruptive on defense. Like this group just seemed to be that much quicker and that much, ability to help each other. And it was just really interesting to know that this would be like this really good defensive unit, even though maybe on the stat sheet it didn't really show that, but it's just like you see that when you put them together and you have those different lineups, the different ones can bring you different things.
Yeah, and great defensive lineups can sometimes impact a game more than the offensive can, because at the end of the day, it's how many points you score versus your opponent. And if you're just limiting them more, then you're just as effective, just in a
Just
different way.
Right, right. It's kind of like the thing that, coaches always talk about when players, give up. Maybe they score 12, but then they like give up 14. So it's like, well, how good of a player are you, right? Like you score, but if
Right.
you're giving up 14, then what are you really
Yeah.
doing, sort of thing, right?
Yeah. Right.
Speaking of
You're
which, coach, you're going to see a bunch of different defenses. Obviously, you have a lot of experience, so your offense has gone up against a lot of defenses. So how do you kind of make those adjustments or adaptations based on different defenses that you're seeing? So what are some of the, common defenses that you see thrown against you, and how do you kind of make those adjustments based on that?
right. So we talk a lot about purpose. If you have a purpose mindset for playing offense, and then you ask yourself, like, what does the ball need if I don't have the ball? You're going to be put in a position to where you're allowed to um, vary what your cut is based on the purpose or the ball, and what those things need. So, for instance, like if a team maybe is switching a blur cut or a rub cut, um, the purpose of the cut has now changed because we don't want to take that switching defender into your space. So we might, deepen the cut to where that cutting defender isn't able to switch. So now I've created the space, the ball needed to attack. Or if a team switches to zone, the purpose of my cut is not to rub, is not to go through, because the ball maybe needs help. So I may continue my cut like I was, you know, going to do for the space purposes, but instead of cutting through the paint, I may stop and show. So that way now I'm, threatening the middle of the zone, which gives the ball another option to throw to. It also may suck in that outside zone defender, so now I can attack or pass. So having that vocabulary for the purpose of your cut and what does the ball need will kind of lead a player to making that read, that decision eventually on his own.
Is that something that you're putting into your practices and you're having your players figure out? Is this just a conversation that you can have with your guys about, hey, this is the defense we're going up against, so let's kind of brainstorm it? How do you kind of implement knowing kind of maybe the defenses you're going up against into having your guys make sure they know how to adjust to it?
Yeah, I think early in the season, maybe in installation, we won't specifically face uh, a set defense, right? But
Hmm.
like I mentioned earlier, in those conversations on the side, the coaches will ask questions to get the guys to the answer that they probably didn't have at the time when they made that decision, in hopes of them getting to it on their own instead of us just telling them this is what you need to do. Because basketball is such a creative sport that the more we tell them what to do, the more we limit them. And so if you ask a player like, all right, reflect on what that possession just was, what did the ball need, and what was the purpose of your movement? And if they can get to the answer that maybe would have helped them in that moment, then you've coached them up and they're ready to go. And the more times that that scenario has occurred, the better they'll get at it. And then the more different scenarios that occur, the more they're exposed to. So now when we're later in the season and maybe we're going to play a team with a real good 1-3-1 that has a big that protects the rim, we can now identify the things that will attack that specific defense with just changing the purpose of our cuts because they've seen it all already. And then, the timely sets here and there are always useful too.
Now, I love the concept that you brought up about, having your players kind of go through that thought process, right? That metacognition that we use is big, thinking about your thinking and going to reflect on what to do. Because I think it's simple, right? It would be very easy to kind of try and just give the answer away and try and just, tell our players, hey, go and, do this when you see this. But then to your point that you brought up, right? The fear that I would have, and I think a lot of coaches would have, is this idea of players becoming robotic and reactive. And, I've joked to my girls before that, like, I can sometimes see you thinking on the court, and I don't want to see you be like out there thinking and processing. I want you to be able to, kind of react and be able to kind of make those adjustments on your own. So I think it's a really good point of like, you don't want to take away our players' ability to like learn the game and think about the game. We want to make sure that they're put in those situations where they can kind of, as you mentioned, right, what does the ball need, and actually like go through the thought process of figuring it out and seeing what works and what doesn't.
Yep. Good stuff.
What else, Coach, I want to ask before we hit our concluding segment here, what else in your practice design? You talked a lot about the 5-on-5 situations that you go through. Can you kind of walk us through kind of what a coach might expect in a typical practice of yours? How much time is devoted in those 5-on-5 situations? What other sort of things are working on? What's kind of going into your practice plans?
Yeah, we kind of talked off air about the 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 structure that Texas has for athletics in high school is that we
Mhm.
get a period during the school day where it's basketball class, it's football class, whatever sport you're coaching. Those kids are there every day. So that period, and I'll answer your question, but this is important because that period is where we do a lot of the teaching. So we're not doing, the live work. We're not doing the high competitive, practice. We're teaching, we're reviewing, we're watching film so they can see it. Then once we get into the after school practice, um, there's about a 12-minute period of our practice where we will review those things that we went over during the athletic period. We will review those things that we maybe touched on yesterday in practice. And that is kind of our dynamic warm up to where not only are they getting their bodies ready for practice, but they're also getting their minds ready. They're getting, their voices ready. They're reviewing the things that we did and maybe practicing the things that they're going to have to do
Mhm.
in a little bit once practice starts. And then once that period of time is over, we don't have anything that's not highly competitive, highly loud. Um, there's winners and losers for every single segment. We may only have, 4 or 5 segments of practice that are, 15 minutes long, but the practice is so intense that they really can't go much longer than that. And so the kids don't really realize that they're in practice because they're constantly playing basketball. And then at the end of the day, when we reflect, we'll ask like, hey, what'd you learn in that segment? What'd you learn in this segment? And they'll usually be able to tell you, well, I didn't expect to see this, but I learned it, in that segment. And I got better at this because we practice it in that segment. They're not saying like, oh, I won and you won. They're learning just while they're playing basketball. And it's crazy, it's chaotic. A lot of people that come in hate it, but it's the way that I feel the kids want to play. It's the way that I think they want to learn. And at the end of the day, like you're having more fun doing it. And so they want to come to practice. They want to get active and they kind of want to be a part of it. So yeah, sometimes practice looks a little crazy and that's by design.
Well, but to that point though, like the game is messy, right? The game is messy itself. The game is chaotic. It's not neat and, evenly structured. There's a lot of stuff going on, and I think that it serves players well when they're in that sort of messy, chaotic environment and it's highly competitive because I imagine, and I'll let you speak to this, right? I imagine that being in that sort of environment where, like you said, there's winners and losers, it's competitive, it's chaotic, there's a lot happening and a lot going on. It gets them ready for game situations. By the time they're in a game situation, it's just mimicking the things that they've been doing in practice. It's not as if the intensity level or anything has really changed that much because they're used to being so competitive and going after each other in practice.
Yeah, and this is in no way meant to, disparage coaches that don't do it like this, but like you said, the game is like that. The unstructured part of a game is far more common than the, let's run this play and let's, run that set. And it'd be great if you got to dictate all that stuff all the time and coaches were able to put their thumb on everything, but really the majority of basketball coaching is done prior to the game starting.
Hmm.
And if they're not being, if they're not in that position, in that situation, feeling the way that it will feel in that moment, then they're not prepared, and we've kind of failed them.
I love that you mentioned that. I had a coach, tell me once, and because he is a coach who, in a game isn't, is sitting down for a lot of the part. He's kind of, just laying back and letting his players work. A highly successful coach too. And he told me, he said, well, practice is exactly what it is. It's practice. He's like, the game is the test. And at the test, the coach isn't gonna, be there out there telling you every single thing to do. It's your time to show everything that you learned in practice. So that's kind of the analogy that it made me think of.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome. Coach, great stuff here. There's a couple questions that I asked to wrap up here that I ask every guest. So I'm going to jump right in with this first one, which is thinking back on your coaching career. What is a specific moment from your coaching career that you think by sharing our listeners would be able to learn from?
Yeah, I gave a lot of thought to this, and the thing, the thing that I want, people to hear, and it may not get as enough attention as it probably deserves, but I I don't know, 4 years ago or so, a friend of mine who coached in the district and I did a lot of research on the tagging up, offensive rebounding, defensive transition uh, system, and I thought it changed my teams dramatically. Um, and if you're not familiar with that, I encourage you to do your research to see if it'll help you. But like the difference in offensive rebound rates that I saw almost immediately, where my team was in the low 30s, to a team that, mid 40s, and the difference in the number of possessions that you kind of steal from the opponent can literally be the difference between a win and a loss. And then, people don't realize how effective it is at defense transition as well, because the teams that didn't do this gave up, 5 to 7 transition points more, even though we had a pretty solid defensive transition system. It's just so effective at limiting that because you're, on the shot, you're moving forward. The transition that the offense gets after a defensive rebound literally has to stop right there. And it doesn't mean you have to guard full court, but it does mean that the transition pass ahead isn't open. And so highly encourage anybody that is wondering how to improve, offensive and defensive rebounds, because I promise you there is a correlation. If guys are habitually moving forward on the offensive shot, they're going to be doing the same on the defensive shot. And if you're struggling to rebound or you're struggling giving up transition points, highly recommend doing your research on that, see if it'll fit for you.
Love it. Something I wrote down, something for me to explore myself. So no, I appreciate you sharing that. Awesome. Coach, to wrap up, I give every guest what I like to call a 60-second soapbox. You can go over 60 seconds. I just like to put a fun and catchy title to things, but I love to use it, Coach, as a way to let you get out kind of a final thought, a closing message, a closing idea, something that you can leave the listeners with. You could take it any direction you want, basketball wise or coaching wise, because, after all, it's your soapbox. So, Coach, I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor to you one more time here and just let you take it from here.
Yeah, one of the things I did touch on earlier was just the the feedback and how important it is. And about 5 years ago, I heard Shaka Smart use the phrase "change your relationship with feedback," and it kind of resonated with me because at the end of the day, uh, you have the ability to use any information given to you, good, bad. I tell the kids all the time, like, grades are feedback. Coaching is feedback. Your parents' punishment is feedback. Just like all the good things, wins and losses and, social media shout outs, all that stuff is just feedback. And if your mindset is in a position to accept good and bad feedback, regardless of the way that it's presented or the way it makes you feel, then you're in a position to use that information to better yourself. And that skill is directly relatable to successful people. And I think that at the end of the day, like, we all coach a sport, but we coach the people that play that sport, and they have to be a better version of themselves after their time spent with us. And so I personally feel very strongly about enabling them to allow that information to better themselves.
Love it. Great point. I think that that's something that all adults, everybody in all facets of life could definitely always improve on, is their ability to receive feedback and hear what the message is. So no, that's something that is evergreen. I think no matter what the situation is, like you said, even well beyond basketball, for sure.
Sure.
Coach,
Yeah.
again, really appreciate you coming on here talking, about offense, culture, all the things, feedback, like you just talked about and left with as well. Loved hearing the insights, love hearing about the things, especially the things you're doing in practices and the different outcomes and things that you stat and keep. I love the GPA part that you mentioned too. That's really cool. That's something that I'm gonna toy around with myself mentally and kind of play with, because I think that's a really cool tool as well. So, Coach, I'm excited to continue to follow along with your journey. I know you're jumped right in here at Made Creek, and you're making things happen and getting the ball rolling here. So best of luck, as I know you have a real busy off season and a busy year coming up ahead, but I wish you the best, and I really do appreciate you coming on here and talking to us.
Yeah, I appreciate you you having me on, and anytime I can talk basketball, I'm game.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for listening. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. We will see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.